Every animal is born with instincts to survive, to protect itself, to recognize danger, and stay away from it. Humans should be part of that danger. We are louder, stronger, unpredictable, and yet, some animals do something evolution never seems to require. They remember us, trust us, choose us. Some return after years apart. Some grieve when a familiar person disappears, and a few spend nearly an entire lifetime building their world around one human being, not because they were forced to, not because food was waiting, but because somewhere between instinct and experience, something deeper formed, a bond. And these 8 animals may understand that bond far better than we do. Raven. The animal that never forgot you. The strongest bonds don't always begin with trust. Sometimes, they begin with a single memory. High above forests and mountain valleys, ravens watch the world with extraordinary attention. To them, every face is different. Every voice carries its own pattern. Every encounter becomes part of a memory that may last for years. Researchers have discovered that ravens can recognize individual human faces, remembering both kindness and danger long after a single meeting. A person who once offered food may be greeted with curiosity. Someone who caused fear may still be met with alarm calls years later. But what makes this remarkable isn't simply their memory. It's what happens after. Some ravens begin following the same person from a distance, watching, waiting, learning, not because they have to, but because something about that individual continues to matter. For a completely wild animal, that's an extraordinary decision, because every instinct tells a raven to be cautious. Yet sometimes, curiosity becomes stronger than caution. And perhaps that's where every meaningful bond truly begins, not with complete trust, but with one small reason to come back. The next animal takes that first step even further. It doesn't simply remember you. It chooses to place its life in your hands. Horse. The animal that chose trust over fear. A raven remembers you. But memory is only the beginning. Trust asks for something far greater. It asks an animal to silence the very instinct that has kept its ancestors alive for millions of years. No creature understands that better than a horse. Long before humans built cities, horses survived by running. A snapping branch, an unfamiliar scent, a sudden movement. Any one of them could mean death. Fear wasn't a flaw. It was a masterpiece of evolution. And yet, stand beside a horse that truly knows you, and something extraordinary happens. Instead of fleeing, it waits. Instead of pulling away, it steps closer. Not because the world has become less dangerous, but because you have become part of what feels safe. Scientists have long known that horses can recognize familiar people through their faces, voices, even the way they move. But what makes that recognition remarkable isn't intelligence. It's the decision that follows. Every time a horse lowers its head, walks calmly beside you, or follows you into a place it cannot understand, it is making the same choice, again and again, to believe that your presence is safer than its fear. And perhaps, there is no greater gift a prey animal can ever give. But the next animal doesn't simply recognize your face, it learns the sound. African gray parrot. The animal that learned your voice. A horse learns to trust your presence. An African gray learns something even more personal, your voice. Every conversation leaves behind a pattern. The words you repeat without thinking. The laugh that escapes when something catches you by surprise. Even the quiet tone that only appears on difficult days. Most people believe parrots simply copy sounds, but an African gray is doing something far more remarkable. It listens, not just to what you say, but to who is saying it. Over years together, many African grays build an extraordinary memory of the people they know. They learn familiar voices, recognize routines, and connect certain words, sounds, and expressions with specific individuals. To the bird, your voice becomes part of the world it understands. That's why the silence can be so profound. When a lifelong companion is suddenly gone, some African greys stop calling. Some become withdrawn, as if the conversation they had been building for years was never meant to end. Because home isn't always a place. Sometimes, it's a voice you've heard every single day. But not every bond is built through memory or words. Sometimes, the deepest connection begins with a choice. Cat. The animal that chose you. A parrot learns your voice. A cat learns your presence. Unlike almost every animal we've met so far, a cat rarely tries to impress you. It doesn't rush to earn your approval. It doesn't obey simply because it's asked. And perhaps that's exactly why its affection feels so different. Because it was never expected. A cat can leave the room whenever it wants. It can sleep anywhere, watch from a distance, ignore every invitation. Yet over time, many choose not to. Instead, they quietly begin building their day around yours, following you from room to room, waiting outside a closed door, curled beside you long before you realize you needed the company. Researchers have found that many domestic cats form secure emotional attachments to the people they trust, often seeking them for comfort when the world feels unfamiliar. But no scientific paper can fully explain the moment a cat silently jumps onto the couch and simply decides to stay. Because love doesn't always arrive with excitement. Sometimes, it arrives so quietly that you only notice it after it has already become part of your life. And the next animal reminds us that some bonds don't end, even after someone is gone. Elephant. The animal that never truly says goodbye. A cat chooses to stay. An elephant chooses to remember. Not every memory is joyful. Some become heavier with time. For elephants, memory is more than knowing where to find water, or which path leads safely through the wilderness. Sometimes, it's remembering someone who is no longer there. Researchers have observed elephants returning to the remains of family members years later, gently touching old bones with their trunks before standing in unusual silence. No one can know exactly what those moments mean to them, but they are difficult to watch, without feeling that memory has taken on something deeper. That same depth can appear in the relationships elephants form with trusted people. A familiar voice, a familiar scent, a familiar face, after years apart. Some elephants still respond with remarkable calm, as though the distance between yesterday and today had quietly disappeared. Because the strongest bonds are never measured by how often two lives meet. They're measured by what remains when they don't. And the next animal teaches us something even stranger. Sometimes, friendship survives without fences, without homes, and without anyone asking it to stay. Dolphin, the animal that never had to come back. An elephant teaches us that some bonds can survive loss. A dolphin teaches us that some friendships exist without obligation. Out in the open ocean, nothing holds a dolphin in one place. No fence, no leash, no promise of tomorrow. Every sunrise offers a new direction, a new coastline, a new pod to follow. And yet, in different corners of the world, marine researchers and coastal communities have witnessed something quietly extraordinary. Certain wild dolphins return, not because they have to, but because they choose to. Some recognize familiar boats from far offshore. Others approach only after hearing a voice they've known before. There are even individuals that have been seen bringing shells, seaweed, or curious objects to the same people again and again. No one knows exactly what those gestures mean. Perhaps curiosity, perhaps play, or perhaps the beginning of something we don't yet have the words to describe. Because the purest friendships are never built on dependence. They're built on freedom, on the simple ability to leave and still deciding to return. But one remarkable animal takes that idea even further. It doesn't just share moments with us. It can share an entire lifetime. Macaw, the animal that shared a lifetime. A dolphin returns because it wants to. A macaw stays long enough to become part of your life story. Most relationships between people and animals are measured in years. With a macaw, they can be measured in generations. Some macaws live for 50, 60, even longer. Long enough to watch a child become an adult. Long enough to see a young couple grow old together. Long enough for a house to change, while one familiar voice never does. Over decades, many macaws learn far more than words. They learn routines, the sound of footsteps in the hallway, the excitement in a laugh, the silence that follows a difficult day. To them, those aren't just sounds. They're pieces of someone's life. That's why losing a lifelong companion can be profoundly unsettling. Not because the bird has forgotten how to speak, but because the voice it expected to hear every morning is suddenly gone. Perhaps the greatest gift a macaw gives us isn't companionship. It's time. The rare chance to share so many years together that the memories no longer belong to one life alone. And yet, even a lifetime together cannot explain the final bond on this list, because the last animal didn't simply grow beside us. It helped shape who we became. Dog, the animal that grew up beside us. A macaw can spend a lifetime beside you. A dog helped build ours. Long before there were cities, before farms, before written history, small groups of humans crossed wild landscapes in search of food. Not far away, wolves were following the very same herds. At first, they were only watching each other, one species cautious, the other curious. But over countless generations, something extraordinary began to change. The boldest wolves stayed a little closer. The calmest humans allowed them to. Neither side could have known. They were beginning one of the longest partnerships in the history of life. Today, dogs do far more than recognize our faces. They read our expressions. They respond to our voices. They sense our emotions before we ever speak a word. Scientists have even found that when a dog and its owner look into each other's eyes, both release oxytocin, the same hormone that strengthens the bond between parents and children. Perhaps that explains why home feels different when a dog is waiting at the door. It doesn't feel like an animal greeting a person. It feels like family welcoming family. Because dogs didn't simply learn to live with us for thousands of years. Perhaps they chose us first throughout this journey. We've seen animals remember us, trust us, understand us, choose us, return to us, grow old beside us, and in one remarkable case, even evolve alongside us. Perhaps that's why the question was never, why do animals bond with humans? Perhaps the real question is, what have we done to deserve that bond? Because every act of trust, every quiet return, every familiar voice, and every loyal companion is a gift freely given. A reminder that the strongest connections in nature are never built through fear. They are built through patience, understanding, and time. Maybe that's why these animals continue to surprise us. Not because they behave like humans, but because sometimes they remind us how to be more human. If you enjoyed this journey, don't forget to subscribe to Wild Unknown, because nature still has countless stories waiting to be discovered, and we'll be here to tell them.